On the corporate chessboard of Wall Street, where power and arrogance intertwine, a seemingly trivial encounter between a ruthless billionaire and a simple janitor transforms into a profound lesson. When a small pebble in the shoe becomes the catalyst to collapse an empire, we discover that true value lies not in what we reflect, but in who we truly are. The winter sun reflected off the windows of the imposing tower that housed the Caldwell Equity Fund, tinting the city's sky with metallic hues. From high above, in his office on the 52nd floor, Ethan Caldwell watched the city as if contemplating a chessboard where each move was calculated with pinpoint precision. 10 years since the first million, he murmured to himself, adjusting the cuff of his shirt where a pair of platinum cufflinks glimmered. And still, it doesn't feel like enough. Ethan had built his empire from scratch. The son of an accountant ruined after the financial collapse of 2008, he grew up with the promise he made to himself to never depend on anyone. His father, an honest man who believed in the system, saw his career and dignity shattered when his clients went bankrupt. Ethan witnessed his father's decline, the ensuing alcoholism, the constant fights. Those memories haunted him and paradoxically propelled him forward. The door to his office opened discreetly and Rachel Lynn entered. The communications director of the fund, Rachel was the closest person to a friend that Ethan allowed in his life. Efficient, empathetic, she seemed to be one of the few who could still see some humanity behind the armor Ethan had built. "Congratulations, Ethan, the fund has surpassed $2 billion in assets," she announced, holding a folder with the quarterly financial reports. He didn't smile. He just adjusted his tie, a mechanical and precise gesture. "Numbers are just steps, Rachel. I want the next one." Rachel sighed almost imperceptibly. She knew that response. Ethan never celebrated achievements. He merely recorded them mentally as points to be surpassed. She was about to comment on the decisive meeting with Harper Technologies scheduled for that afternoon when a metallic noise interrupted the calculated calm of the room. Thomas Avery's cleaning bucket had tipped over in the hallway, spilling water and reflections on the Italian marble floor. Ethan turned with contained irritation, his blue-gray eyes fixed on the older man who was quickly trying to contain the mess. "Mr. Avery, could you at least be more careful? This is not a storage room," said Ethan, his voice low but filled with disdain. Thomas looked up, serene. There was something in the silent dignity of that gaze that always unsettled Ethan. "Sorry, sir, I'll clean it up right away," replied Thomas with a firm voice without exaggerated subservience. Rachel tried to lighten the mood. "He's always around here early. He is dedicated." But Ethan already had another thought as he watched the 68-year-old janitor with his wrinkled hands and upright posture. There was something about Thomas that intrigued and irritated him simultaneously. Maybe it was his calmness, so opposed to the constant hustle of Wall Street. "Since you have the cloth in your hand," he smiled ironically, "do me a favor, shine my shoes. I have an important meeting in 10 minutes. The silence that followed was heavy. The analysts in the adjacent open office pretended to look at their screens, but everyone was attentive to the scene. Rachel looked away, visibly uncomfortable. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then slowly knelt down. He picked up the cloth, carefully wiping it over the Italian leather. The wrinkles on his hands betrayed a lifetime of work, but there was firmness in them, as if each movement was carried out with purpose. Ethan, arms crossed, watched. "Taking too long," he taunted, checking his watch. Thomas replied calmly, "Some things need time to truly shine, Mr. Caldwell." When he finished, Ethan noticed a small scratch on the right shoe, almost imperceptible, but there it was. "Is this your shine?" he mocked. "Maybe the problem is the age." Thomas stood up, wiping his hands. "Sometimes, sir, a scratch serves to remind us where arrogance begins." Their eyes met. For a moment, Ethan felt an unease he could not name. There was an unexpected depth in that simple man, as if he held secrets that could dismantle empires. But he chose to laugh. "Go back to what you know, Avery." And closed the door. The rest of the morning passed amid phone calls and document reviews. Greg Foster, Ethan's partner and a man with broad smiles for clients and sharp comments for subordinates, appeared around 11. "Ready for Harper?" Greg asked, leaning against the door. At 50, he had the gaze of a predator always on the lookout. "I heard they're hesitant after what we did with Westbrook." "No reason," Ethan cut in. "We profited, they profited. That's the market." Greg smirked. "Sure, and your $2 million bonus depends on it, right?" Ethan didn't answer. Greg had always been like that, measuring strengths, testing limits. Ethan kept him close because he was efficient, but he knew that at the first opportunity, Greg would take his place. It was like having a shark in the pool, useful for keeping smaller predators away, dangerous when you're bleeding. Hours later, the decisive meeting with Harper Technologies began in the main conference room, the one with a view of the park. CNBC cameras were on, investors watched in real time via exclusive broadcast. The CEO of Harper, James Peterson, an elegant and meticulous man known for his attention to detail, shook hands with Ethan. The tension was palpable. This acquisition would place the Caldwell Fund on another level. "Mr. Caldwell, I've heard your fund is the most disciplined on Wall Street," Peterson commented, adjusting his thin-framed glasses. Ethan smiled with false humility. "Control is the secret to success. Our analysis of Harper shows untapped potential that we intend to maximize." Peterson looked down and his gaze fixed on Ethan's shoes. A subtle smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Control, then why walk around with a scratch like that?" he pointed out. The room laughed. It was just a trivial joke, a light comment before the business tension, but CNBC's camera captured a close-up of Ethan's shoes and the moment of embarrassment that followed. In minutes on social media, the joke spread, "The man who can't polish his own image." The meeting continued, but something had changed in the atmosphere. Peterson seemed less receptive, questioning numbers he wouldn't have before. The air of confidence Ethan carried had suffered a subtle, almost imperceptible blow, but a real one. And as if the universe conspired, by the end of that same day, Greg Foster, the partner waiting for the fall, anonymously sent financial journalists documents of an unexplained internal merger the Caldwell Fund had conducted months earlier. The scandal started small, like the scratch on the shoe, but quickly grew. Harper backed out of the deal. Ethan's $2 million bonus, which depended exclusively on this acquisition, evaporated. And his reputation, built over decades, cracked with the same subtlety as the scratch on his shoe. In the days that followed, Ethan's empire began to crumble. Investors withdrew funds, the board demanded explanations, and the financial press, once so friendly, now questioned every decision made by the financial genius who lost his touch. 2 days after the official announcement of his temporary departure, the tower was practically empty. The Caldwell Equity Fund logo was to be removed the next day. Ethan entered alone in the main lobby, the echo of his own steps accompanying him like ghosts. The marble that once reflected power now seemed cold and distant. He stopped when he saw Thomas sitting on one of the atrium benches, drinking coffee from a simple thermos. "Came to see the final spectacle?" Ethan said with a tired half-smile. "No," Thomas looked up. "Came to finish the shift." "You've won, Mr. Avery, the janitor against the millionaire, a good script." Thomas shook his head slowly. "There's no victory in humiliation, Mr. Caldwell." He paused, looking at a distant point beyond the windows. "Do you remember Harper and Avery Holdings?" Ethan stood still, trying to process the unexpected question. "Yes. A small industrial parts manufacturing company. We entered when the market crashed in 2015. It was a great deal. For you, yes." Thomas placed the cup on the ground. "It was my company." Ethan's eyes widened, feeling the impact of those words. "What?" "It was my father's and then mine. It took us 50 years to build it. When your fund bought 51% of the shares, they laid everyone off. The factory closed. I lost everything, including my son, who worked there. The stress led him to a heart attack at 34. His voice remained calm, with no hatred, only carrying a weight that seemed to have been borne for a long time. Ethan lowered his eyes, feeling a strange sensation in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. Shame. Thomas continued. "Working here wasn't a coincidence. Sometimes fate places us in front of the same faces. To see if we've learned anything different from the last time." The air seemed denser. Ethan sat down on the bench next to Thomas, suddenly tired, as if the weight of all his decisions had finally reached his shoulders. "I didn't know. I just followed the numbers." "That's the problem with numbers," Thomas said gently. "They count profits but don't tell stories." For a few seconds, silence reigned between the two men. The distant sound of a cleaning machine echoed through the empty corridor, reminding them of a world that continued spinning despite personal falls. Thomas stood up and, in a surprising gesture, placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "It's not the scuff on the shoe that matters, sir. It's what it reflects." Ethan looked up, feeling strangely small in front of the man he had scorned. "And what does it reflect, in your opinion?" Thomas smiled sadly. "That the shine only matters if it comes from within." He walked to the elevator, standing tall with neither triumph nor resentment. Before the doors closed, he turned. Sometimes the scratch comes before the healing. The doors closed and Ethan remained seated, contemplating the emptiness of the lobby and the emptiness within himself. Months passed. The name Caldwell Equity Fund disappeared from the headlines. Ethan sold the penthouse apartment, closed accounts, and walked away from the city he once considered his kingdom. He now lived in a small studio in a residential neighborhood, where he had started a project to help young entrepreneurs start sustainable businesses. Rachel occasionally visited him, bringing news from the financial world he had left behind. Greg Foster had taken over the fund, renaming it, but was already facing issues with unhappy investors. One autumn morning, while crossing the city's Central Park, Ethan saw a caretaker sweeping leaves under the yellowing trees. It was Thomas, with the same simple coat and the same quiet dignity. Ethan stopped, hesitating for a moment. Then he approached. "Still cleaning up what others leave behind?" he asked, trying to smile. Thomas looked up, and the sun reflected off his old watch, likely a memento from better times. "Someone needs to do it." He laughed lightly. "And sometimes it's a good place to think. About what? About how life knows where to place each of us." The two looked at each other for a moment, and Ethan realized there was no resentment in Thomas's eyes. There was wisdom, perhaps even compassion. Neither of them spoke about forgiveness. Neither apologized explicitly. But when Ethan extended his hand and Thomas shook it, something invisible settled between them, as if the universe had finally found its balance. "I'm starting a new project," Ethan said after a moment. "Helping small businesses avoid being swallowed by funds like the one I had. Maybe you'd like to see it someday." Thomas nodded slowly. "I would like that." On the horizon, the autumn sun cast a golden light over the city. Ethan looked at his shoes, now simple, without the ostentatious shine of his Wall Street days. There were no risks in them, just natural marks from a more authentic journey. "You know, Thomas, I've learned that true value is not in what we accumulate, but in what we leave behind." Thomas smiled. "And what do you intend to leave behind, Mr. Caldwell?" Ethan reflected for a moment, watching the leaves dancing in the wind. "Something better than a scratch." The caretaker nodded and returned to his work, sweeping the leaves with the same dedication as always. Ethan went on his way, realizing that sometimes we lose everything just to discover what truly matters. Destiny had its silent way of restoring balance, and sometimes it only took a small risk to reveal how much we became captives of our own reflection. When the external shine faded, what remained was character, the only investment that never lost its value.